Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today we are going to be talking about Pascal Siakam and some of the rumors coming out recently about teams maybe sort of gauging interest in him, calling the Toronto Raptors to see if he's available, what the price might be, etc., etc. Things like that concerning a potential Siakam trade. So we are going to dive right into it here. We'll start just by kind of reiterating. Um, there have been rumors about multiple teams being interested in Siakam in some capacity. I think the biggest and most recent one was that the Indiana Pacers were interested in calling. There were also some rumors about the Magic sort of looking into the situation. We had an earlier rumor about the Clippers, and obviously the Atlanta Hawks have been a team and a name that has popped up pretty frequently across the entire offseason. Obviously, there's been no movement directly with any of these teams. These are all just rumors at the moment, but it shows the interest level in Siakam. We've got four teams that have sort of prominently stated their interest here, and obviously there's probably a couple more working behind the scenes. So the fact of the matter is, a lot of teams are looking at Siakam as a player that they might want to pick up. The question is, well, why is that? And the answer is because Siakam is pretty damn good. Unfortunately for him, playing north of the border has sort of taken a little bit of attention away from his game. That's just kind of going to happen, but he is very, very clearly the best player on the Raptors roster right now, and basically has been since the departure of Kawhi Leonard. He is a two-time All-Star, including an All-Star appearance just last season in 2023. He was a member of the Raptors lone championship squad in 2019, that team that was led by Kawhi Leonard. He was a big part of that championship roster. In fact, that season, 2019, was the season where Siakam actually won the Most Improved Player award. So it was really the moment where he took a step forward in his development, became an integral piece of that Raptors squad. Then obviously Kawhi Leonard leaves and Siakam gets the chance to be the number one option for the Toronto Raptors. And honestly, maybe the Raptors have not been able to replicate the playoff run that they did when they had Kawhi and they won that championship. But Siakam has done a pretty damn good job being the number one option for this team. You take a look at his stats just for the previous season, for the 2022-2023 campaign. He looks incredibly solid here. 24.2 points per game. That is a career high for him. 7.8 rebounds, 5.8 assists, which is also a career high for Siakam, while shooting 48% from the floor overall. So, career highs in points and assists for him. I believe he hasn't averaged fewer than, I think it's 21 points per game in any of his last four seasons. So basically, since Kawhi Leonard left, Siakam has been the guy, and he has played relatively consistently when he does play. He has been hurt a couple of times and he's missed a few games, but I don't know, nothing massive at this point in his career. So he was a member of a championship lineup. He won the Most Improved Player award. He continued to improve beyond that over the next few seasons, and now he is consistently the best scorer on the Raptors and really their best player overall. So that is why there is so much interest in him. Pascal Siakam is someone who has proven himself to be, for the most part, reliable, both in terms of scoring, rebounding, even getting other players involved there with those 5.8 assists this last season. So, relatively complete package. I think maybe his three-point shooting is a little bit lower than you would like, but I don't know. You got to have a flaw somewhere. But he is definitely a player that a lot of teams are looking at and seeing as a bona fide upgrade for a lot of those squads. Now, there is one caveat here before we, or as we get into the logistics of an actual trade for Pascal Siakam, and that's the fact that Siakam is in the final year of his contract. This year, 23-24, is the final one on his deal, and you don't have a full guarantee that he's going to re-sign long term. So a lot of these squads who are sort of gauging the interest, looking at the price tag for a Pascal Siakam trade, also have to grapple with the fact that there's a worst case scenario here where you make this trade for Siakam and you only get him for 1 year. You can't extend him, you don't re-sign him, and he just walks away in free agency next summer. So that's got a lot of teams maybe feeling a little bit nervous, but that is honestly the number one thing. When we start looking at the trade scenario, which we are going to do right now, that trading team, the ones that will be getting Siakam, need to have some sort of reassurance that Siakam would resign, right? Um, if they don't get that sort of guarantee that Siakam would sign with them long term, I think a lot of these teams might still make this trade, but the value of Siakam has to be significantly lower because you're only guaranteed to have him as a 1 year rental if he won't say before he's traded that he would resign, right? Um, I don't know how much that trade value will be lowered. We'll talk about that in a second, but that's all just kind of speculation at the moment. But teams want to know, hey, if we're gonna move assets to get a guy like Siakam, we would like to know that we're gonna have him for more than a single season. Otherwise, that changes the teams that would be sort of looking at him. Instead of a team looking to pick him up to build around him long term, the teams that would be interested would be squads that are confident that they're maybe one piece away from a deep playoff run right now. So some of those teams in the running would drop out, but we would have to see. And it all kind of depends on Siakam at this point. He has not said a crazy amount about these rumors, which some people sort of tend to believe means that a lot of the rumors aren't necessarily true, which, fair enough. But Siakam has not seemed overly receptive to leaving Toronto right now, right? He hasn't necessarily said that he's happy there either, but we haven't seen any sort of statement from him talking about whether he'd re-sign if he went somewhere else. It just hasn't really come up yet. Probably because a lot of these rumors are, again, just rumors, and we haven't reached that stage yet where Siakam has to consider his future. But that is something to bear in mind here. He has not said one way or the other whether he really cares to be traded or not, so you would think that kind of leans towards him remaining with the Raptors. But either way, if a trade does happen, what is Siakam worth here? If he will not re-sign, or if he doesn't guarantee that he will re-sign, right? His value is still pretty high. I'd say you're looking at least like one solid player, right? A starting caliber kind of player, obviously. At least one first round pick. Maybe it's unprotected. Meh, I don't know. Maybe light protection on that. And then the potential salary matching players, right? If the starting player that gets sent is not enough to match the salary all by themselves. That's what I think that he would be worth if he's not willing to promise beforehand that he would resign. And I do want to stress here at this point, I said at least one solid player, at least one first rounder, right? That's the phrase that we should focus on. At least is the key part here. It could be multiple players, it could be multiple picks, it could be, any combination of the two. But anything less than what I stated just feels like it's a little bit too low, even for just 1 year of Siakam. Because this is an all-star guy who averaged nearly 25 points a game. I don't think you can really lowball that offer, even if his status to extend or resign is up in the air. And honestly, if Siakam were to indicate that, yes, if you trade me, I will resign with whatever team I end up going to, then the price goes up significantly, right? I said at least one starting caliber player, at least one first rounder, and salary matching. If Siakam is willing to sign a long-term deal with whoever trades for him, I don't know, double at least one of those, right? Either the starting players or the first rounders, the price would just go up pretty massively at that point. So if you're the Raptors, you could trade him and you could get a whole lot of value back, that's for sure. But this is the part where I want to dump a little bit of cold water on this entire situation. Just talked about Siakam, the teams that are interested in him, and maybe what his value would look like. But now, let's take a look at this from the Raptors' perspective, because if you start to do that, the logistics of the trade begin to matter a little bit less, and you get into just the simple question of why would the Raptors do this? And the answers aren't fantastic. Now, Siakam is clearly the best player on the Raptors. I started out basically the entire video by saying that. He is the cornerstone of this roster right now. And if Toronto were to trade Pascal Siakam, that would effectively push the Raptors into a full-on or at least a semi-rebuilding scenario, right? The problem is that seems to kind of go against a lot of the team's recent moves and recent feelings for this squad. So, sort of getting into that a little bit, last season the team goes exactly 500. They were 41-41. They make it to the play-in. They lose to Chicago, which that was not good for their morale, but they were a 500 team. They were fighting, they were still in the hunt. They make it to the play-in. They see postseason action. In that process, guys like OG Anunoby and Gary Trent Jr. both miss around 15 games. Precious Achiuwa missed over 20 games. The team had Jakob Poeltl for only the final 25-26 games of the season after they got him basically at the trade deadline from the Spurs. So a lot of guys missed some time, not massive amounts of time, right? 15 games each for Anunoby and Trent Jr., 20 for Achiuwa. And Poeltl, he didn't miss those games, but he wasn't playing for the Raptors then. So the idea here is that the lineup at relatively full health and with new additions, which I'm going to count Poeltl as a new addition, even though they got him last season because he only played 26 games. But Poeltl, guys like Dennis Schroeder, guys like McDaniels, who they picked up from the 76ers. The hope is that with those guys now in the lineup, with Siakam at the helm, and with some of those key pieces around them maybe missing a few fewer games than they did last season, the team can improve on that 500 record. They could win more than 41 games. And honestly, that doesn't seem like it's asking too much, right? You bump that win total up, honestly, even still single digits, and you're looking a little bit better. Maybe you still end up in the play-in, but you're a better seed, you're a better team overall, and your chances of getting through that play-in look quite a bit better with only relatively minor adjustments. So I feel like the Raptors feel as though they're in a position where it only is going to take them a little bit better of an effort to get significantly better results. So would they want to just trade Siakam away and blow all that up and just kill any momentum that they feel that they have? I don't really know. But that's not really the only point here. There is another one that I sort of wanted to talk about. I actually mentioned it a little bit in the early offseason preview for the Raptors, and that is their new coach. Darko Rajakovic. Still not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he is the new coach. There's a lot of people who are sort of mentioning the fact that he's never been an NBA head coach before. Some people are touting that as a sign that the Raptors don't plan to seriously compete, right? They're bringing in a quote-unquote new head coach to blow it up and to rebuild, and you bring in a new coach to coach young guys in a scenario where you're not really trying to make a playoff run. Sometimes that's true. I can't fully take that away. That is a play that a lot of teams often employ. But just as often, it's the opposite case. You bring in a new head coach to shake things up, right? In this instance, Nick Nurse was the coach for a long time, and the organization felt like the roster had plateaued with Nick Nurse at the helm. So a change gets made, not because you're waving the white flag, but because you feel like something needs to change. So it is true that new head coaches are often brought in for teams that don't plan to compete. But claiming that that's any sort of definitive evidence here that the Raptors are going to blow it up and trade Siakam away seems a little bit dumb. We've seen first-time head coaches thrive right? We've seen first-time head coaches push their teams into the playoffs and beyond, but we've seen some crash and burn and take over a full-on tank job. But really, we have no real way to tell which one it will be until the coaches are actually coaching or the organization tells us beforehand that they have no intention of competing. We have not seen Rajakovic coach yet, and we have not heard from the Raptors that they're just sort of giving in and tanking, so there's no reason at this point uh, to believe that that's going to be the case. It could be, but we don't have any evidence for it. And also, Rajakovic is getting a little bit of crap here when he shouldn't be. Yes, he's never been a head coach before in the NBA, but he was the head coach of Oklahoma City's G League team from 2012 to 2014. Although I think back then it was still called the D League, not the G League, but it's the same league. He was an assistant coach in Oklahoma City from 2014 to 2019. He was an assistant coach in Phoenix in the 2019-2020 season. And most recently, he's been the assistant coach in Memphis from 2020 to 2023. So this is a guy who has paid his dues. He's come up as an assistant coach on multiple teams, and now he gets his chance to be a head coach. And I don't think you would want a guy with that kind of experience if your plan is to just trade all your good players away and run a bunch of 25 and younger guys out there a la the Houston Rockets and see what sticks, right? So the new coach I don't think is really a factor, but we move along to sort of the next point here for people sort of arguing that a Siakam trade is going to happen and that the Raptors are tanking. Some people might say that letting Fred VanVleet, their former starting point guard, letting VanVleet go in free agency could lead to Toronto trading Siakam as well, opting for the full-on rebuild, saying, hey, this roster as constructed didn't work, let's just restart the whole thing. And that, I feel, is very much missing a big point here about the Fred VanVleet scenario. Fred VanVleet was not let go because Toronto did not want him, right? It wasn't just like, get this guy out of here, we don't want him anymore because we're going to tank. It was because they didn't think it was worth matching that ungodly, ridiculously high contract that he was going to be offered by the Rockets, the one that he eventually took, that's going to pay him $43.3 million. The Raptors passing on matching that is not an indication that they're tanking. It's an indication that they didn't want to commit $43 million to anyone on their roster. And that's fine. That's not a tanking move. That's a move that 29 other teams in the league probably make as well. So VanVleet was given a massive offer sheet that the Raptors didn't think was going to be financially viable for themselves. They don't let VanVleet go just because they don't care to compete anymore. In fact, if you look at what they do in the aftermath of the VanVleet, not a trade, the VanVleet signing with Houston, they bring in Dennis Schroeder, a guy who maybe isn't quite Fred VanVleet if you were comparing the two in terms of overall sort of skill set and scoring ability, but Schroeder is not a cut cost and tank kind of point guard. If you were looking for a guy to just run your offense and you didn't care about winning or losing, I don't think Schroeder's the guy that you pick up here. This is a guy with playoff experience. This is a guy who just came off of a strong year with the Lakers, who is recovering from the free agency fumble that he put together a couple years ago, where he turned down that big offer and then had to play for basically the vet minimum for his service time. So I don't think Schroeder is a guy who's looking to just kind of coast and play for a bad team, and I don't think the Raptors pick him up with the intention of being that kind of team either. So if you start looking at some of the moves the Raptors made, it doesn't quite look like a rebuild sort of maneuver. And speaking of which, we talk about moving from their guards to their big men other than Siakam. Two guys, right? Pirtle and Jalen McDaniels have been picked up by the Raptors here. They re-sign Pirtle and they get McDaniels in free agency. There's some people who are sort of citing that as the Raptors preparing to move on from Siakam. The reason why they get McDaniels and Pirtle is because they need big men to take Siakam's place once they trade him. I can maybe see that a little bit in terms of the logic, but it doesn't make full sense, right? Because Jalen McDaniels was a cheap contract. 2 years, 9.3 million. That's fine. That's a really simple and cheap contract. But Pirtle was given 4 years and 80 million. So about $20 million per year, which honestly is not, it's not going to break your bank either. 20 million in today's NBA with the current contracts being given out is maybe slightly above mid-level, right? But if you were planning to trade Siakam and go into a full-on tank job, a full-on rebuild, I don't really know why you would re-sign Hurdle. And especially not for 20 million a year for 4 years. I feel like that would be a situation where you say, hey, let's run Precious Achua a little bit more. Let's get our backups in there. Let's spread out the minutes for them, guys like Boucher maybe, and not pay that $20 million for a player who you would be running out there if you don't intend to win any games. That's a move that just kind of feels like it doesn't quite connect with the tanking mindset, with the trading Siakam mindset. It feels more like guys like Pirtle and McDaniels are meant to shore up their stable of big men. They are meant to be the guys who are going to back up and play around Siakam, not the replacements for him. That could obviously be incorrect, but just going by gut feeling, that's what this feels like. Now, we talked about what the Raptors sort of brought in, the guys that they have re-signed. Let's talk about, though, the guys still on the roster for them as well, because the Raptors have been long averse to dealing any of their young guys away, right? A lot of previous rumors about the Raptors trying to make trades have basically died in their infancy because they have categorically stated that guys like Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, that they're not being moved, that the Raptors are going to hold on to them, right? They've never been dealt, and all of those trade rumors basically die because the Raptors squash them. But if the Raptors were ever going to sort of cash in on their patience with these players, and by cash in, I don't mean trade them, I mean get the returns in terms of their actual play that they want, now feels like a pretty good time. Now feels like the point where some of these guys are getting maybe to the ends of their contracts, and now is the time to see just how far their development has gotten. If there was ever a time for these guys to be part of a winning rotation, it would be now. Otherwise, I don't know why the Raptors would continue to hold on for them to them for this long, unless they felt like they're finally going to get them playing at the level that they want. So, at this point, I think the Raptors front office believes that this team can work as constructed with the guys that they've brought in and with Siakam being the focal point. I think they believe that this team could be in the playoff picture in the East. And if you do that, if you make that point, then the long-term future for this team comes into a little bit more focus. Guys like Siakam himself are still in the final year of their deal. Gary Trent Jr. opted into his player option, but that is his final year on his contract as well. So if the Raptors stay the course, play it out with this lineup, and they do find a way into the playoffs here and maybe even some success there, then all of a sudden it becomes a lot easier for the team to commit to re-signing these guys for the future because they know that the team is capable of competing. So I think that's what the Raptors are hoping for here, that they keep this together, that they don't trade Siakam, that the young guys finally sort of prove that they are capable of being consistent contributors, and that this team turns into a playoff squad that could then commit and continue building into the future. So all of that is to say, I don't know if there's a whole lot to the Siakam rumors right now of a trade. If it is going to happen, then the Raptors would have to pull the plug on a lot of what they appear to be planning right now. And a lot of the points that I went over could go both ways, right? I mentioned for their new head coach, letting Van Vliet go, getting guys like McDaniels and Pirtle. It could be seen as preparing for a tank. It could be seen as shoring up the lineup to try and compete. It can go both ways. So if Siakam is traded, then you do make that pivot, right? Your new head coach is just going to coach young guys who are probably not going to win a lot of games, right? Schroeder comes in just as a guy because you didn't want to pay Van Vliet $40 million. Pirtle and McDaniels are the replacements for Siakam, not the guys who are going to play alongside him, etc. And the Raptors just kind of move into a rebuild. But the moves can be interpreted either way, objectively speaking. But based on what we're hearing and seeing from the Raptors themselves, from their front office and their players, it feels like they're viewing this in more of a positive light for themselves. And if they're doing that, then I would have to assume that we sort of follow suit and start looking at this as the Raptors are going to give it one more chance instead of trading Siakam. I have no idea if that's true though. Again, if the offer is good, if the Pacers or someone just blow them away with multiple players, multiple picks, give them an offer that you really can't refuse, then fine. You trade Siakam, you play the young guys, and you just rebuild like that. But I'm not sure just what that offer is going to look like, but it would have to be a damn good one. But let me know what you think. Will Siakam be traded? Do the Raptors feel okay with parting with him and kind of just resetting this version of the team? If he is going to be traded, where does he go? And what do you think the value of Pascal Siakam would be? Please feel free to share your thoughts and let me know. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.